Hello, everybody. Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. Welcome to Film Talk, and I am thrilled to have with us Artie Schmidt. From Back to the Future to Forrest Gump, editor Arthur Schmidt has crafted some of the most iconic films. He's a two-time Oscar winner, as well as the recipient of numerous other industry awards and honors for his editing work. Schmidt is well loved and respected in the industry. And before we start our conversation, let's take a peek at a clip from his work in Back to the Future.
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit. What's this? What did I tell you? 88 miles per hour! The terminal displacement occurred exactly 1:20 a.m. in 0 seconds!
Ah, Jesus Christ.
Well, welcome, Artie. That clip, of course, has become such an iconic sequence. When you look at it now, does it bring you back to when you first saw it? And did you realize that it was going to be such a great film?
No, I had no idea, and as you can imagine, that sequence was quite a challenge because it's a serious action sequence. Bob shoots such good coverage that it was all there for me to make the choices, and then the performances with Chris Lloyd and our lead kid was they were there, they were great. So the material was, a bit of a gift. You just didn't want to screw it up.
Correct. But when you say that it was challenging, why was it so difficult about it?
Because there was so much footage. There was second unit footage with the car that Frank Marshall shot. There was the main footage that Bob Zemeckis shot with the two lead actors. So it was just a lot of material to sift through and make exciting, and then anticipate the special effects that were going to be added to the car later on.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that it thrills me about the many times I've spoken to you is the fact that even before I met you, I revered your dad so much, Arthur P. Schmidt. Not many people, people do remember him, but I think the average cinephile is not aware of him. And this is the man that edited, worked closely with Billy Wilder, Sunset Boulevard, and Ace in the Hole. What were your memories of growing up with your dad and editing?
Well, most of my memories were from going to the studio occasionally with him and spending the day with him and watching him work in those days at the Moviola, going into the editing, going into a projection room and looking at cut scenes with him. And he didn't talk very much about what he was doing, but it was all just absolutely fascinating to me. So, he got me hooked. But even though he said, don't you ever go into this business, it's just too hard. It's too insecure, too many layoffs, and you never know where your next job is coming from. Even though he knew once he hooked up with Billy Wilder, he had a pretty good idea that he'd do Billy's next movie.
So you mentioned that he didn't talk to you too much about it, but one of the things that I love about watching both of your work is how simple you get, both of you make it look. Did you study his work afterwards to learn about editing?
No, I don't think I studied his work. I saw enough of it, when he was alive, and but you mentioned the operative word that he used a lot was to keep it simple. And little did I know that that was the hardest thing to do. Is you have so much film, and you feel an obligation to sort of cram a bit of this piece in and that piece, and you have to sort of pull back and just use the bits and pieces that tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And you're cutting, and then you're recutting and recutting the recut, trying to simplify it and get it just right.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look, Artie, at your dad's work in Ace in the Hole, which is one of my favorite movies, directed by Billy Wilder and starring Kirk Douglas.
Mr. Boot, I'm a $250 a week newspaper man. I can be had for 50.
Why are you so good to me?
I know newspapers backward, forward, and sideways. I can write them, edit them, print them, wrap them, and sell them.
Don't need anybody right now.
I can handle big news and little news. And if there's no news, I'll go out and bite a dog. Make it 45.
What makes you so cheap?
A fair question, considering I've been top man wherever I've worked. You'll be glad to know that I've been fired from 11 papers with a total circulation of 7 million, for reasons with which I don't want to bore you.
Go ahead, bore me.
I'm a pretty good liar. I've done a lot of lying in my time. I've lied to men who wear belts. I've lied to men who wear suspenders. But I'd never be so stupid as to lie to a man who wears both belt and suspenders.
How's that again?
You strike me as a cautious man, a man who checks and double checks. So I'll tell you why I was fired. In New York, a story of mine brought on a libel suit. In Chicago, I started something with a publisher's wife. In Detroit, I was caught drinking out of season. In Cleveland,
I get the picture.
What I love about Ace in the Hole to this day is that in the editing in particular I'm talking about is that there is no extra fat. There's not a shot that seems to be wasted. Everything is so precisely used.
Yeah, he wasn't one for overcutting. His mantra was to keep it simple, and I try to remember that in all the films that I edited, because that's a really hard thing to do. You're given so much material for scenes that you feel you've got to use it, but you always have to pull back and know what the story is in the scene that you're editing, and try and accomplish that with, as my father always said, simplicity and honesty.
How much your dad had a tremendous working relationship with Billy Wilder, and you yourself have an incredible relationship with Robert Zemeckis. I've always wondered, how is that relationship established, and how do you first start trusting one another, a director and an editor?
I think you just have to start editing, putting scenes into first cut for the director on the film that you're working on, and keep it as honest and as direct as possible, and hope that he likes it. I mean, it's always a scary proposition to show a first cut to a director, whether it's a scene or whether it's the whole movie. But I think honesty and simplicity, that my father's mantra was keep it simple. And I thought, okay, yeah, let's keep it simple, but that's really difficult given all the film that you have to put a scene together, because you feel an obligation to use all the bits and pieces that have been given you, but you have to pare it down to just the essentials that tells the story and the drama in the scene.
You mentioned that your dad told you not to go into the editing business. What made you decide? Because you started late, right? I mean, you were in your 30s when you started editing.
Yeah, I think I was 30, maybe 32, or maybe I was 28. I'm blanking out, but he told me to not get into the business because it's just too difficult. And yet at the same time, I could see that it was a business that he loved, and obviously was very good at, and worked with great director Billy Wilder, and then later on hooked up with Jerry Lewis as his co-director and supervising film editor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty obvious that he loved what he did, in spite of what he said to me, you know, get out of don't get in the business, go and sell insurance instead. But obviously, I ended up not listening to him, but that was because I had been living in Spain for a couple of years when he died, and when I came back a couple of days after his funeral, two of his former assistants said there was an apprentice job available at Paramount. Would you like it? And I said, you bet, because I was flat broke. And I just decided that I would try it for a year until I got back on my feet financially and kind of sorted out my mother and two brothers' lives. Got us all back on our feet after my father's death. And obviously I liked it and stayed.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I was fascinated to read that success didn't come quickly, that you actually worked for a very long time. It was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like 10 years after you started in the business that you started getting sole credit for editing, correct?
That's right. But in those days, the union required you to serve 8 years as an apprentice, as an assistant. So that was the reason for the initial 8 years. And then you put in your 8 years, and then you don't have any editing experience, except that, you know, some editors you worked for would give you scenes to edit and practice with. But there's nobody out there who's automatically going to hire you when you don't have much experience.
And you were assistant editor to one of another iconic editors, Jim Clark. You know, tell us about working with Jim and what you learned from him.
Oh yeah, I was working on a Mike Nichols movie as an assistant to another one of my idols, Dee Dee Allen.
Oh,
yes, yeah, the great Dee Dee Allen. I worked with her on Little Big Man, and then on this Mike Nichols movie, which I don't think ever really had a proper title, but the movie folded because after a couple of weeks, Mike Nichols and the leading man didn't see eye to eye, and I was suddenly out of work with my two favorite filmmaking people, and I looked in the trade papers and I saw Marathon Man, and I saw Jim Clark's name there, and a lot of other wonderful people associated with the movie. But I'd always been a big fan of Jim's work. Anyway, I called him up and said, can I be your assistant editor? And in those days, if you were an editor from New York or England, you came to work in Hollywood, you needed a union editor as a sort of standby editor. Those were the union rules. So I became Jim's standby editor and assistant editor.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And in Marathon Man, for those who haven't seen it, is famous for the running sequences. Of course, Dustin Hoffman running away from Laurence Olivier. were you involved in the actual running sequences with Dustin Hoffman?
Well, I had to double check with Jim whether I cut those or whether he cut some, and we both couldn't remember, and we decided that he cut some and I cut some because I was recommended to Michael Mann for the Jericho Mile because he'd been told that I'd cut the running sequences in Marathon Man, and the Jericho Mile was full of running sequences. So that's how I got that job.
And that was sorry to interrupt, Jericho Mile was your first time as solo credit, right? Solo editor credit?
Solo editor, yeah.
With Michael Mann. What was it like working with Mann? Well, and eventually you'll of course do The Last of the Mohicans with Michael Mann.
Right. Michael Mann and I got along. He's not the easiest to get along with or the easiest director to work with, but he gave me complete freedom to do whatever I wanted on the Jericho Mile. I had the first scene that I cut on the Jericho Mile, I forget which one it was, but it was a running sequence. And I finished it, and I told Michael that I was ready to show it to him, and with great trepidation, because he's Michael Mann and it's our first time together, I ran it for him and he loved it, and he just turned the whole movie over to me and let me do my thing.
That's great. And this led to you working with the great Michael Apted in 1980, and your feature solo feature as an editor, Coal Miner's Daughter, which we're going to let's take a look at Coal Miner's Daughter, starring Academy Award winner Sissy Spacek. Well, the point that I was going to make about this is that you're actually editing musical sequences, and was that daunting for you to approach that you've never done musical sequences and the concert sequences with Sissy Spacek? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think I'd ever done a musical film before that film, and most of Sissy's numbers were shot live. They're not shot to playback, so that's Sissy singing live in sort of angle after angle. Sometimes there were multiple cameras going simultaneously, but no, I'd always grown up loving musicals, so maybe a certain amount of that rubbed off in the editing of those scenes. I just sort of knew where to cut, but cutting is all about rhythm. Music is all about rhythm. So if you just follow, the sort of obvious, I don't want to make it sound easy, but it's not, but it is all about rhythm. And then when you have a wonderful director like Michael Apted that gives you such good material, and then Sissy was just a gift. I don't think I've ever had such a good performance from an actor where you just could not go wrong no matter what you did, because she was always just wonderful.
You've edited 2 Academy Award winning performances, actually more, but 2 major ones with Forrest Gump and Tom Hanks and Sissy Spacek, Best Actor, Best Actress. I've always been curious your role in building the performance. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think you have to have a sense of what's funny or what's dramatic, and kind of use the appropriate angles at the right time. It's kind of a cliche to say, well, you build to the dramatic climax, so you're building probably to end your scene with a close-up or with close-ups. So you don't dissipate those close-ups by overusing them early on. You save them, for the most dramatic moment. But that's a little bit of a rule of thumb, which you can violate anytime you want, as long as you can make it all work. But yeah.
But in 1980, when you were 1979, when you were editing Coal Miner's Daughter, you could tell behind, looking at the clips that you had a tremendous performance in your fingertips.
Yes, yes. Sissy was wonderful from the first week. I just sat there saying, "This is a gift." Also, Michael Apted's direction was so wonderful that everything about it was good. There were no false moments in the movie, which was absolutely essential, because that's what Loretta Lynn's movie was all about, is honesty and truth. So that was a signal to me to be as honest and as simple as possible in the editing.
Mm-hmm.
They led the way. What Michael Apted did and Sissy did, I didn't want to mess that up by over editing or any kind of fancy editing that would draw attention to itself.
In that sequence that we showed, there is quite a lot going on. You establish the fact that this is exhausting her being on the road, and also the strain in the relationship with Doolittle, at home. Is that something that was on the script or already prior to editing, that sequence needed to show you that sort of multiple storylines happening?
Well, as far as I can remember, it must have been in the script, but it was also in the way that Michael Apted shot it and the way it was performed, the scenes of her on the bus and the drinking, and then Tommy Lee. I don't remember, all the details, but it was there in the material. It was just a matter of how you organized it and edited to the piece of music that's behind it.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this success led to you meeting Bob Zemeckis, and you did quite a few films with him. We had Back to the Future, and then your first Academy Award, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I'd love to ask you about Roger Rabbit, the fact that none of the animated sequences were done before you actually had edited the film. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
And how
I had to imagine where the animated characters were going to be, but there was always obviously an empty space in the scene where the animated character would eventually be. So, it wasn't a mind-blowing thing to have to imagine that, yeah, there's going to be somebody there. But also on the first take of every camera setup, somebody would walk through or walk a dummy through where Roger was going to be or where an animated character was going to be. So, it was, I had a lot of help in imagining what was going to be there. But also, if you have a scene with, Bob Hoskins on one side and an empty space on another, and he's talking to the empty space, and there's an off-camera actor reading the lines, you get to know what's going on and just have to imagine that the animation is going to be there.
You make it sound so easy, Artie, but I mean, just imagining the fact that you're actually editing with empty spaces and hoping that the animation is going to fill it up it's pretty scary. Were you involved with did you have to re-edit things after the animation was incorporated into the film?
Well, I'm sure that after previews we made some changes, but they would have been very minor as far as as far as I remember, because because the animation was so expensive, we had to have a pretty finely tuned movie. Between what Robert Zemeckis and I and everybody else wanted in the movie. You just couldn't spend, extra money on extra material that might eventually be cut out. So it was pretty, down to the wire, down to the last frame. As far as every cut was. I actually begged Disney to let me have a few extra frames at the end and beginning of every cut, just in case I had to extend or change the cut. And they said, absolutely not. I said, come on, 6 frames, what is that? That's this much. They said, no. So yeah, it was a big challenge, but you just had to imagine everything as a final cut.
Well, a big challenge, and you were rewarded with your first Oscar. Let's take a look at Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Penny, this cat's right behind us!
Not for long, Roger. Now they're right in front of us.
Eddie, we're going backwards. Turn us around. Give me the wheel. Give me the wheel. The cops are doing our tail.
I know the cops are on our tail. What do you think I am, Betty?
Yeah!
No! Pull the lever! Which one?
Which one?
Which one?
I'm gonna ram him. What the?
I'm getting too old for this.
Jumping jippers.
Hey, Roger, what do you call the middle of a song?
Gee, I don't know.
Unbelievable. And we should point out that this was not done with digital editing. You have done digital editing, but this was it predates all of that.
Yeah.
Do you look at a sequence like that? I mean, it's unbelievable what you guys were able to accomplish.
No, you're reminding me that was edited on film. I'd kind of forgotten that. But no, it was just, like I said before, it was just a huge challenge. But again, the material that I was given was wonderful. The voice of Roger Rabbit was the right voice, and then Bob Hoskins was an absolute gift because he was wonderful in that movie. I can remember when Bob was casting for the lead role in Roger, he was going through almost every leading man in Hollywood, and he'd show me, pictures of Paul Newman or I don't know, Rocco. Anyway, lead actors. And do you see him as the lead? And I'd say no. And then one day he showed me a picture of Bob Hoskins, and a week before I'd seen an English movie with Bob Hoskins as an English detective, and he was absolutely wonderful. So when Bob showed me a picture of Bob Hoskins, I said, yes, that's him.
You told me one time, a story about that the ending had to be reshot. The scene with Christopher Lloyd towards the end of the movie, is that correct? While you were editing, that there was something that wasn't lit just right and you guys needed to reshoot it?
You're right, but I don't remember the exact reason for that. There was some technical reason, and I think a dramatic reason, but I don't remember specifically why it was reshot, except it was reshot to make it better.
I mean, what I remember, we were talking about Christopher Lloyd and how on point he was and terrific, and you said that when you guys reshot it, he recreated everything exactly that he'd done in the previous take.
Yes,
Um,
that's right. And the scene that you were talking about was a scene that was lit too dark, and Bob wanted to reshoot it, and Chris was absolutely wonderful in the scene. And it was the climax of the movie, almost. And it was Chris's big scene. And I said, well, can't we just print it up? Because how are you ever going to get that performance from Chris again? And he said, don't worry, I can do that. And he said, Chris can do that. And Chris did it. He was absolutely wonderful again. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. He's just such a wonderful actor. And then afterwards, I thought about Chris's beginnings, that he was a New York stage actor. And so, you're on every night and you've got to be great every night. So he could be great again when he had to reshoot the scene.
mhm. Do you enjoy, as an editor, seeing, that's the same actor, and does that help with the editing, knowing the actor and having worked with them before? Because Christopher several times, Tom Hanks, Castaway and Forrest Gump, among others.
I just think I'm lucky to be working with those people again, and having, two wonderful actors in those movies, because there's still a lot of choices to be made. But those two that you mentioned, Chris and Tom Hanks, they were wonderful. Their performances were a gift to me.
Mhm.
I've had many movies where I've had to struggle with actors' performances to make them look okay and be believable. But those two were wonderful.
Well, speaking of great acting, Daniel Day-Lewis and Last of the Mohicans, 1992, and let's take a look at it. Here you are working again with Michael, the difficult Michael Mann.
The difficult Michael Mann, yes.
Go ahead.
The bloody hell plan is this?
I want you to go.
If we go, there's a chance there won't be a fight. There's no powder. If we don't go in that, there's no chance. None. You understand? Coward!
You've done everything you can do. Save yourself. If the worst happens,
You stay alive. If they don't kill you, they'll take you north up to Huron land. You submit, you hear? You're strong. You survive. You stay alive no matter what occurs. I will find you. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far. I will find you.
I recently saw this, Artie, and it holds up so beautifully. It's so romantic. And
Oh, it is so romantic, yeah. Madeline Stowe was great, and Daniel Day-Lewis, yeah. Their performances were gifts.
why is it we're teasing that Michael Mann is so difficult? Is it that he's very exacting and demanding?
No, not so much. He and I had a great relationship, but yeah, I did leave that movie. But
I'm sorry, you left the movie?
Yeah, I left the movie because we had just too many disagreements. I'm pretty sure I left the movie, and Michael's not easy to work with, even though we kind of got along. But I don't want to say too much
No, it's all right.
about him, but I just thought
Yeah.
I'd better leave before I started being treated like the way he treated some other people on the movie. So I left, and multiple editors came in after me and helped make it the wonderful movie that it is. But they left. I mean, one would leave, another one would come on, and then that one would leave, and then it just got to be.
Well,
I don't want to. What am I going to say? He's demanding or whatever, but.
yeah. Well, you went back to working with Robert Zemeckis 2 years later in 1994 and Forrest Gump, and your second Academy Award. I'd love to hear your approach to Forrest Gump. We keep using the term simple, and your take on certain scenes could have easily become maudlin or too sentimental, and I love the way that certain scenes are crafted. So, I'm using the term again, simple. Can you talk about your approach to Forrest Gump?
Well, simple is the word to describe it. I let Forrest be the impetus behind the way the movie was edited. I thought a lot of people said, Forrest was a contrived character, and in the editing, he was made to be, I don't know, sympathetic or sentimental or whatever. And I avoided all that. I just let the editing be a reflection of Forrest's honesty and simplicity. I just had to not manipulate any emotional moments, and there were lots of those in Forrest Gump, but I was determined that they should be as unsentimental and as honest as they could possibly be.
And that's, to me, summarizes the success of the film, is how honest and sincere the editing is. And you did a similar hat trick in Castaway, where it doesn't become sentimental, it doesn't become maudlin. It's all about the showcasing the performances. And you, after Forrest Gump, you went on to Birdcage to work again with Mike Nichols. But Birdcage was not edited from film. Can you tell us about that transition, and was it challenging to move from film to digital?
Well, the first probably 2 months it was challenging. Then, little by little, I got used to it. What bothered me most about digital editing and my starting out is that I needed help from assistants to help me out of a jam, and if I got into some sort of digital or technical difficulty, because I only learned how to edit digitally. I didn't know how the editing room was organized in a digital way. So that brought certain problems to me, and I always had to yell for my assistants and say, help, help. And, somebody would come in the room and help me out of a technical jam. That didn't happen too often, but it made me sometimes insecure that I didn't know digital editing as well as I would have liked to. My favorite
go ahead. Sorry.
button in digital editing was undo, because you could just press a button and you would undo a cut, and then you could redo it and fix it. Whereas in film, you had to unstick the tape and add the bit of trim that you'd cut off.
But I was having this discussion with a friend of mine, recently, that the principles don't change from one to the other. You know, the ideas of how a scene should unfold, et cetera, that doesn't change. It's simply just, you know, the craft, how it's done, how it's put together, right?
Absolutely. No, I agree 100% with what you just said, because I decided that I wasn't going to edit any differently just because now I could do it faster and maybe do more versions, and because now I could just hit an undo button and undo a cut that I thought was going to be all right, but wasn't. Whereas in film, you had to take the tape off and join the film up with its trim. So no, I was determined that I wasn't going to change my way of editing film, because I always tried to let the film tell me what to do. Whereas I think an awful lot of people started making more cuts because they could make more cuts faster and more easily. Especially you would see that in television shows.
And, you know, we mentioned that you went on to work on Castaway. You're also involved in Pirates of the Caribbean. And even after retiring, Robert Zemeckis lured you back to help with Flight and other projects. Looking back at the stuff that you worked on, which is the one piece that you're the most proud of, having worked on?
Oh, that's really difficult. It's, you know, it's like saying, which is your favorite child? You know, I can find reasons. Obviously, I loved Forrest Gump, and I loved Coal Miner's Daughter. I loved doing the Back to the Future movies, especially the first one. And it was always just great working with Bob Zemeckis. So I'd work on almost anything that he asked me to work on, because he's such a great guy and a great director.
And how would you describe the relationship with Bob, you and Bob working together?
Well, he always said that his favorite part of filmmaking was film editing, and he loved to come in and sit in the chair next to me, and we'd look at all the material and make changes. And it was a real, I think, back and forth thing. You know, ultimately it is the director's movie, but I never felt that he used me as a pair of hands. Obviously, he asked me to come and, you know, do his next movie and then do his next movie. So we were just in sync, and style-wise, he just agreed with what I was doing. But that's not to say that we didn't go through the material and make changes according to what he wanted, or a combination of ideas. His input was obviously invaluable. He's an incredibly talented guy.
Yeah. What advice, Artie, would you give to a young person who's interested in going into editing?
I think see as many movies as you can, or as many these days, TV movies, TV shows, and kind of try and sit back if the person is interested in editing, and see what's going on editorially. And also to look at some of the great films for their editing. Study, you know, study the films.
Study your dad's films and study your films, Artie.
Yeah, study my father's film, because, as you know, we talked about earlier, simplicity and honesty is so important in pulling out the comedy or the drama. You know, you've got Sunset Boulevard for drama, you've got Some Like It Hot for comedy, and they're both beautifully edited movies.
Well, the same thing can be said about your work. I mean, look at the range, you know, musical, action, comedy. You were able to dominate that all and do it well.
Oh, thank you. Well, one of the secrets is work with good directors who give you good materials, that you just have to be careful not to mess up, because the material that Bob Zemeckis and Mike Nichols and
Michael Mann and Michael Apted.
Michael Apted, they all gave me good stuff good material to work with.
Yeah. Well, Artie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I've always been a big admirer of your work. And
Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you for making it so interesting and fun for me to kind of look back on my career and talk about the movies that I haven't thought about for a long time. But thank you very much. It's been great.
Absolutely. Well, see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.
So, see you at the movies.